My dear student, welcome to my online class. Hope you are well by the grace of Almighty. Today I am going to discuss about Chapter 4, Agriculture and Climate. Lesson 4, Season Neutral Crops. Neutral means having no strongly marked or positive characteristic or future. But in the previous lesson, we learned about the identity and characteristic of the different seasonal crops. In the last lecture, we have learned about the identity and different feature of the different season, such as Rabi season, Kharif 1 and Kharif 2 season. For this, the crops of one season cannot be cultivated in another season. Some crops we will have to cultivate in a Rabi, and some of them we have to cultivate in a Kharif 1 and a Kharif 2. We cannot cultivate some type of crops in the different season, but there are some crops and that are grown for the profit throughout the year. Can you name few of such crops? But there is so many crops and which you can be cultivate throughout the years without depending on a season. But can you guess it? Can you tell me the some of them are names? But the crops and that are grown throughout the year for profit are all season neutral Baramashi crops, and those who cultivate the throughout the year, which is called season neutral crops or Baramashi crops. All the season neutral crops are also day length neutral, Diba Nirapokko, because these crops can blossom and produce the fruits irrespective of day length. All the season neutral crops and those so we can cultivate that throughout the years, it's also called the day length neutral, Diba Nirapokko, because and these crops can blossom. This blossom means a state or period of flowering and produce. We can produce fruits irrespective, regardless of the day length. Some of them crops are different on the day length. Long day we can crop some type of crops, but short days we can crop some type of crops. But season neutral crops, they don't depend on the day length. We will learn in the details about the influence of the day length in blossoming and producing fruit in the next chapter. But in our country, the season neutral horticulture crops include the red amaranth, lal shak, eggplants, brinjal, celery, papaya, banana, etc. That in our country, the season neutral horticulture means relating to the art or practice of garden cultivation and management, including the red amaranth, lal shak, eggplants, brinjal, celery and papaya and banana, etc. On the other hand, the season neutral field crops including the maize and groundnut and etc. In our country, a lot of crops cannot be cultivated throughout the year because of meteorological condition and limitation. See, in our country, we cannot cultivate the lot of crops throughout the year because of weather conditions and restriction. Import of some high value crops and like tomato and onion could be avoided if they could be grown here throughout the years. But if I can produce the throughout the year tomato and onion, we don't need to export this type of crops from other countries, and we can save our foreign currency. For the solution of this problem, research work is in progress, and some varieties of tomato and onion have already been released, and scientists and they have released some types of tomato and onions and which can be produced throughout the years, and this is the good news for our country. Doesn't this question arise in our mind why some crops can grow throughout the year? In your minds, and we can arise a question, so how can it be possible to produce the crops throughout the years? To get the answer to this question, we must think about the climate needs of a crop. To get this answer, and we need to know about the climate impact on a crops. And we already know that one kind of climate is required to grow Rabi crops, and well, the need is different for the Kharif crops. We'll have to understand the climate impact on the crops productions. Season neutral crops can be cultivated during the both Rabi and Kharif, and it can be assumed from this that the extent of the climate need of the season neutral crops is rather wide. So, but in a season neutral crops, and we can produce this type of crops in a Rabi and a Kharif season, the climate does not impact on this type of crops. As a result, and these crops can be cultivated during the both season throughout the years, and so we can say that the season neutral crops, and it can be grown in a both low and high temperature because it can be tolerated in both of them situation, can be grown in a both less and heavy rains, can be grown under the low as well as in high humidity, can produce the flowers and fruits under the both short and long day lengths. Lesson 5. Influence of weather and climate on crop productions. What crops and will grow in which area depends on weather and climate of that area. So suppose in some country they can produce some type of crops and depends on the climate, and other countries cannot produce this type of crops because also the depend of the climate. The element of weather and climate have impact on the crop productions. Now we will discuss how this element influence the crop production. So in this chapter we will discuss about this type of elements which influence the crop production. One is the sunlight. Sunlight has its impact on a crop production in many ways. Without the sun we cannot think about our life also, existence also, and similarly also plant. We know that plants produce their fruits through photosynthesis. What do you mean by the photosynthesis? The process by whose plant uses the energy from light of the sun to produce its own fruits. That means using the sunlight when the plants to produce his own fruits is called the photosynthesis. In this process, the presence of sunlight is essential. For this reason, sun presence in the world is an essential. Without this, we cannot think about the plant's life also. And in the presence of sunlight, water combined with the carbon dioxide to produce the carbohydrate in the leaf of green plants. So in the presence of sunlight, you mixing with the water and the sunlight, they can produce with the carbon dioxide to produce the carbohydrate to become a greeny plants. As for the need of the sunlight, plants are divided simply in two types, and we can divide it into the two types. One is the light loving plants, another one shadow loving plants. Some of them we can produce in the direct sunlight, and some of them we will have to give a shadow to produce it. Maize and sugar can grow well in the full sunlight, and while tree and a coffee prefer the shade. The day long to the plant, which plant are exposed influence the production of flower and fruits. On the basis of the sensitivity to day length, plants are divided into the three kinds. But few of them crops we can produce in the long day time, and some crops we can produce in the short day times. So according to this, we can divide into the three kinds. One is a long day plant. For production of the flower and fruits, and these plants need at least 12 hours in a day length, namely as a rice, jute, ash goat, snake goat, sponge goat, and etc. This type of food need the 12 hours a day length. And short day plant, for the production of this flower and fruits, and these plants need less than 12 hours of the day. Then wheat, mustard, almond rice, jima kulmi, Indian spinach, puishak, day neutral plant. This plant can produce the flower and fruits and under any day length, and ground, nut, banana, tomato, and cotton. And this is also called the season neutral crops. And two, heat. Heat influences the survival of the plants, and without heat we can think about it. For this, plants shows a minimum, optimum, and maximum temperature. Minimum and lowest, and optimum is favorable, and maximum is the highest temperature. These three temperature points are known as a cardinal temperature. Cardinal temperature will be different for given plants and depending on variety and species. It will be depend on the crops varieties and different species, and the distribution of crops in given area is controlled by the cardinal temperature. It is depend on the cardinal temperature. On the basis of need of temperature, cultivated crops can be divided into two categories, and namely cold season crops and hot season crops. According to the heat, we can divide the crops. One with the cold season crops, another one is the hot season crops. One cold season crops, and these crops prefer to grow in a low temperature. Example: wheat, potato, chickpea, lentil, cauliflower, conalcol, etc. For growth, these plants require minimum 0 to 5 degrees Celsius, and optimum 25 to 31 degrees Celsius, and maximum and 31 to 37 degrees Celsius temperature. 0 to 5 is the lowest, and most favorable condition is 25 to 31 degrees Celsius, and maximum is the highest is 31 to 37 degrees Celsius. We can produce in a cold season crops. And hot season crops, these crops grow in a high temperature. That means some crops we can produce in a high temperature which can be tolerate, and jute and rubber cassava and etc. For growth, these plants require minimum 15 to 18 degrees Celsius. That means the lowest and optimum is the favorable 31 to 37 degrees Celsius, and maximum it will be needed 40 to 50 degrees Celsius temperature. 3. Rainfall. Water is very important for plants, and this depends on the water retained in a soil. How much the water retained in the soil, and rain is the key source of the soil moisture. Without it, we cannot produce the crops and properly, because we will have to irrigate more and more. And for this amount, hour and fall of rain is very significant for crop production. How many hours and of rain fall in our country, it will be different on the crop production also. Because of rain variance, different types of crops go better in the different area of the world. Air current, respiration, photosynthesis, pollinations of flower, etc. are controlled by the air current. Air flow, and also the impact on the crop production. So that is why airflow is a more important one also. Relative humidity arise in the air. High humidity is favorable for the crops in their initial growth phase. Then high humidity is granulation state, and low humidity may causes the shrinkage of the grain. And too much humidity in the air proves up the spread of the disease and the insect. And most of the too much humidity, and that infects the disease and also insects. And dew and a fog, and sometimes dew and a fog can create the favorable environment for the spread of disease in the crops. At too much dew, we will see, and also spread the disease and insect in the crops, and which is very damageable. Lesson 6. Influence of adverse weather and climate on the crop productions. And crop production increase when the weather climate are in a favorable, but in adverse weather and climate crops production decrease, or it may cause a total crop loss. In this chapter, we will discuss the different types of adverse weather. We will learn about the damage caused by such a weather, how climates and weather influence of crop production, and it will discuss in and which situation our crops and will be damaged. One is the heavy rainfall, and when it rains more than usually it does, and we call it the heavy rainfall. Now it rains and more than usually it does, we call it a heavy rainfall. That heavy downpour in the rainy season impedes the production of the vegetable plant and lean on the ground because the excessive rain, and their leaves and flowers and fruits get damaged. And heavy rain may cause the flood and water logging, and plant water logging result in oxygen deficiency in the soil. In this situation, the growth of the plant and their production and suffer from damages. Various plants like papaya and jackfruit etc. even die in such a condition. But even more a heavy rainfall, and then crop production is be damaged. And due to the heavy rainfall, the outlet of the stagnant water is to be done, and that will hailstorm when the rain drops in a shape of ice balls in the called hailstorm. Then along with the rains, when you drop from the sky the ice ball, and it will be the hailstorm. In Bangladesh, hailstorm occur in the month of Chaitra and Vaishak almost in every year. We will see that almost in every year there will be the hailstorms, and downpour of hail in the southeastern part is more than that of the north part, and it will be in the southern part of the country there is a more hailstorm rather than the northern part of the country. In most of the cases, hails and accompanies an northwest wind. Hailstorm causes the huge damage to the crops, and especially leaves and flowers and fruits, and suffer extreme injury due to the hailstorm. And for hailstorms, in our leaves and flowers and fruits also damaged. And hailstorm active for few minutes and can totally damage the crops like boru rice, jot, mango, banana, onion and garlic in our country. But it will long lasted for only 2 or 3 minutes, but within the 3 minutes it will be damaged the whole crops. That will be very devastating. Drought. When there is not enough rain for the long period of time is called a drought. So the amount of water that plant releases throughout the transpiration is more than that amount they can absorb from the soil, and during the drought condition of the water deficiency continues hindering growth. Crops and suffer from drought in almost all seasons in Bangladesh. Rajshahi, Sapainababganj, Natu, Dinajpur, Rangpur, Bankura, Kustia, Jashore, Madaripur region experience the severe to moderate drought in almost in every year. So that will be the very devastating to crop productions and flood and damage and loss of crops, and depend on the flood water level and flow and flood water and prolongation. So excessive rains and also causes the flood, and which also damages our crops also, and flood water inundate the low and mid lowlands and area. For this reason, fields of crop, especially paddy field, go underwater. It will be submerged under the water usually at the time of sowing and post sowing period, and among rice and suffer damage because of the flood. And sowing and pre-sowing, post sowing period also causes damage of all causes because of the flood. But borrow rice and sustain loss from flood caused by overflow of a river during the period it matured. If the borrow rice, and it will be mature, and then it will be safe from also the flood. Do the homework and submit to the full classroom. Stay home, stay safe. Thank you.